All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Todd Brous. My friends call me Captain Kirk, and I don't believe in the no-win scenario. And yeah, I know what you're thinking. No matter how much clinically proven Aveeno daily moisturizing lotions that you use, burlap still chafes. It's a problem, I know. I'm here with my partners in crime, Susan Schultz and Liz Otero, and we would like to welcome everyone to HBAP Startups. So let's get started. For those of you who are new to the Startups group, we have a few announcements that we do at the beginning of each meeting. We'll do some short networking breakout rooms, and then we'll come back together for our main event. And first off is our mission. We're here to help foster and fortify an innovation and entrepreneur community coming out of the Harvard Business Analytics program. And our goal is to provide our members with the tools, knowledge, leadership, and confidence necessary to create and grow their businesses from the ground up. And as always, you're probably wondering how to engage with our community. So I'm going to post a few links into the Zoom chat. Please, for those of you who are HBAPers, I know you cannot get enough of my Slack posts, so I'll keep doing that. And check out our HBAP internal community calendar. For those of you who are not HBAPers, go to analytics.hbs.edu, click the Apply Now button, and there's a small but statistically significant chance that you'll get into Harvard. Right, Andrea? And so we have a newsletter. Please sign up for our newsletter so we can newsletter you. Bring a guest, spread the word. We're looking to grow our community. And just again, a little reminder that our recordings will be posted publicly on YouTube. And I'm going through our backlog and slowly uploading them. But please like and subscribe to our videos on YouTube. Susan.
Yes. So in the spirit of this really cool group of ours, right, we want to create this environment where we have awesome speakers. We have people come in and present their ideas and get feedback and all kinds of stuff like that. So we want to make sure that it's an environment of collaboration and confidentiality and trust. So in that perspective, all rights are reserved by the presenter. And of course, our honor code. We always follow. And then the feedback approach, Francis Fry's, which is 5 to 1 for every 5 pieces of prickly or spiky feedback. Sorry, I'm having that backwards. For every piece of 5 optimistic feedback, we only want to have 1 spiky or prickly feedback because positive feedback is much more functional. And then our illustrious colleague, leader, and friend, Kelly, saying, you can just skip the prickly, spiny feedback altogether and just be optimistic. And then just in the spirit of who we are, if you're worried about confidentiality or conflict of interest, just reach out to Todd, Liz, or me, and we will help you figure it out.
Thank you, Susan. I was reading Kelly's comment in the Slack, distracted by that. All right, so welcome new folks. I think everybody's been here, so I'm going to skip over the welcome introduction. Just a little announcement. Well, today is Allison Byers. Next week, Susan, we're doing a workshop.
We are. So based on a lot of feedback from all of you that you've enjoyed our workshop so far, and then talking with a bunch of you to see what should we cover, we decided to cover this fairly ambitious topic of how do you de-risk all the parts of being an entrepreneur. And so we've done some of this already through our testing business ideas workshop and the value proposition workshop. And we're continuing it tonight with Allison. So one of the things about a pitch deck really is that investors use your pitch deck to really figure out, are you de-risking your idea and your company enough that they want to invest in you? So we're going to hear from Allison tonight about that and a whole bunch of other cool stuff. And then next week, we'll start the part of de-risking yourself and your team.
Awesome. Thanks, Susan. All right, so let's do some breakout rooms. I think I got this working. Give about 5-6 minutes and we'll see you back here. All right, everyone. I hope you had fun in your breakout rooms. Just a last announcement for some overtime. When you exit Zoom this evening, please fill out the exit survey. A little web page will come up. We like data. We're analytics people. Save a tree, kill a beaver, and fill out a survey. After we're done, we'll stop recording. We'll go into some overtime. So if you have any off-the-record questions, please stick around for that. Again,
Do
yes.
not kill a beaver.
Okay, don't kill a beaver. That was a joke. Yeah, that was, yeah. No beaver killing. Recordings are going to be made publicly available. So just keep that in mind. Stick around for some overtime. And now, oh, right, before I forget, thanks to Kelly Kimball, we will be raffling off 40 subscriptions to Scroobious's medium tier. I will be submitting a link at the end of the call, so please stick around for that at the end. If you have any questions, pop them in the Zoom chat. And now, without further ado, Allison Byers. Allison is the founder and CEO of Scroobious. She's been here many times. We love her here. Scroobious's mission is to increase diversity in the startup ecosystem by helping founders affordably create compelling pitch material. And at the same time, she's helping all of us figure out how to properly craft our message. Scroobious is also building a compelling platform to help investors easily find those founders. Prior to founding Scroobious, Allison launched and co-ran a medical device company spun out of MIT, where she raised nearly $10 million and experienced firsthand the challenges that come with fundraising as a female founder. Her earlier career includes over a decade of startup and tech operator roles. Allison is an angel investor, a startup mentor and advisor, speaker, and works with dozens of diversity-focused accelerators, nonprofit organizations, and university programs. She received her MBA from Boston University. She's a mom of 2 young kids and is a vocal proponent of parent entrepreneurs. So now, without further ado, please, let's all briefly unmute ourselves and let's give Allison a warm round of applause. Let me stop sharing.
Thanks.
Sorry, I'm so clapping. I'm excited to see you, Allison. Good to see you.
Oh, Link, it's good to see you too. I love seeing all these friends here. I love that.
I'm listening while I'm in the kitchen trying to master these dishes, but I'm so glad to be here and see you. It was good to see you.
Oh, well, thank you. Kelly, you did tell everyone not to be an ass, and so you also can't do that. You have to abide by the same rule. Just to note.
He who makes the rules can break the rules.
I don't know if that's how it works. All right, let me get my screen share going. Give me 1 second. All right, everybody seeing my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Awesome. Let me get my screen set up so I can see all of you. All right. Well, thanks so much for having me back. I'm excited to be here talking about how to mitigate risk with your pitch. So I know a lot of you are friends. A lot of you have probably seen me do a pitch workshop before. Some of this is going to seem very familiar, but I'm going to focus it really on the risk element because I know that's what the group is working through, and Todd and Susan have some great programming coming up about it. So I really focused on understanding that risk side of your pitch. Todd did a wonderful job introducing me already, so I don't need to go too much into it, but I can give you a little bit of background on kind of how I got into entrepreneurship to begin with, because I have been doing a lot of speaking lately on nonlinear career paths. And I'm going to bet a lot of people here have had nonlinear career paths, and it hasn't always included entrepreneurship, and it can be helpful to hear others' journeys. And I'm happy to talk about any of that as well. For everyone who knows me, I'm a really open book. So any questions about anything, even if it's not about de-risking your venture with your pitch, I am all for it. So I was a tech operator for about 10-ish years. Venture-backed startups that utilized big data sets to understand consumer behavior and advise big companies and clients on how you can interpret that information to create changes that you would like. And I'm pretty open about this now. As Todd mentioned, I am a mom of 2 young kids. I didn't talk about this for a long time, but now I do. I had gotten pretty high up in my organization as a tech operator and came back from maternity leave with my first child and was forced out of my job. It was a pretty pivotal time for me. The company used travel as a way to do it. So they awarded me management of a new LA operation while I was nursing a newborn from Boston, where I am, and essentially made me pick, do I want to keep working there or do I want to nurse my baby? And I picked my baby. So I left that role. That was 11 years ago now. Things are better today, but still not anywhere near where they should be. But at that time, fractional work was not really a thing for somebody who was highly educated and highly paid like I was. And it was a real identity crisis time for me. I ended up staying home for a few years because I knew we wanted to have a second. And I didn't really know how to work, how to go back and do that. So when I finally was ready, because being home with children is a very fulfilling life for many people, it was not the right thing for me, and I was desperate to go back to work. I went into entrepreneurship. That was my foray into it. It let me get back into a career. It let me have flexibility, let me use my skills in a really exciting way. And I helped launch, and then I ultimately ran a startup medical device company that we spun out of MIT in a hospital system here in Boston, where I was the business one that joined a team of scientific founders. And it was really, really thrilling. Loved the experience. I did all the things from incorporation through negotiating with the trade license office, which some of you may be going through or have experience with. We were a Class 2 medical device, got us to our FDA clearance, and did our fundraising. Raised about 10 million for that company while I was there, and then we went to acquisition. And for me, what really stuck with me that I was not prepared for, despite what I already shared with you about going through a whole lot of stuff when I was one of a few women at a large tech company, I encountered just unbelievable gender bias in fundraising itself, in that part of running the business. And so when we were acquired, I spent some time researching the space of capital allocation and fundraising and pitching to understand what did that look like. And you find some pretty abysmal statistics very quickly, which I'm going to guess a lot of you on the call here might be aware of. And there's some great advocates for change on this call as well. But I can share with you, in my home state of Massachusetts, of all the venture capital dollars allocated, and we allocate the 3rd highest amount of venture capital in the country, only 0.9% go to women and only 0.56% go to Black founders. So it is not just even inequity, it is a systemic obstacle that I don't believe we will see any true movement toward parity, at least in our lifetimes. It is really, there is no other industry that has that level of inequity that exists in it. And so I wanted to do something about it. And this was, I'm telling you all of this, this is why I started Scroobious. I started it 3 years ago. I'm a startup founder too. I believe that there are other ways to open up capital classes and get allocation to a better state of equity for early stage founders, and particularly those who identify as underrepresented in the space. So all of that is to say, I'll tell you a little bit about what we're doing at Scroobious, and it's awesome because all of you can get accounts through the amazing Kelly. So it's not even a sales thing. I'm just going to tell you what we do. And I really hope that everyone here who's not in our community does join our community. We've worked with about over 400 founders now in essentially the past 1.5 to 2 years that we've had a product out there in the market. It's a fantastic group. So we're building a marketplace. That's the core of what we're doing. And we have 2 sides, as any marketplace does. On the founder side, what I identified was a need for accessible and affordable true guidance in how you create pitch material that's going to be seen as investable and where you're going to be taken seriously. Because giving an investor pitch is unlike any other presentation. And if you can't put yourself in the mindset of an investor, it's nearly impossible to make the material that they're looking for, that they're going to find compelling. Just like you, if you can't put yourself in the mind of any audience, but you can put yourself in the mind of a customer or a partner. Sales is intuitive. Selling your opportunity for future return is not intuitive. That person might never be your customer. So it's very different. And so we have an online platform where we've taken everything you would get from working with a pitch coach and made it accessible through asynchronous online education. So we have little micro videos, very short instructional lessons. We have some downloadable templates to do the scary stuff like building a bottom-up market size. You can totally do it. All of this is teachable and it's on our platform. And then we pair that online education with some very specific points of personalized feedback. So you can upload draft material, say, I would like a human to look at my stuff and tell me if I'm on the right track and give me some actionable guidance. And we do that. We also organize a ton of events, pitch practices, networking with investors. We really have a great community and ecosystem going. We are a few weeks away from launching our MVP of our investor-facing side. And there, this will be interesting to HBAPers, what we're doing is building a recommendation engine where we're going to have personalized algorithms per angel investor. I'm focused on angel investors as a capital class, not venture capital. And we're going to be able to really intelligently show opportunities to relevant investors for you so that they can discover, connect with you, give you feedback on your pitch, and have a different type of marketplace than what's out there right now. I'm going to stop talking about our platform. Happy to answer any questions about it at the end or whenever people would like. And you can reach out to me anytime. So before we get started, I really love the HBAP community. It's been great. I got to go to the pitch competition where our friend Susan here won, and I got to be a judge for it, which was so cool, and party with everybody. You guys are a really, really special community, and I'm so glad to be back. So thank you for inviting me back to this even more special subset of an already special community who are working on your startups. Okay. So as we go through kind of the meat of talking about de-risking your venture with your pitch, I really love interactivity. I don't like listening to myself talk for extended periods of time. So if you have a question, if you want to talk about something, please raise your emoji hand. It puts you to the top of my screen. I am notoriously awful at looking at chats while I am talking. I don't even have it open. So just raise your emoji hand and please, or just shout out, interrupt me. I don't really care, but I'd love for this to be a conversation and not just me talking for a long time. Cool? Thumbs up, you'll all interrupt me? Awesome.
Sounds great.
Thank
I'll
you.
monitor the chat if there's anything, Allison.
Thank you, Todd. Appreciate it. Okay, so when we talk about pitch decks, there are really two lenses to look at your pitch through. And this is gonna start off sounding like my normal pitch workshop, but I'm gonna do it a little different after we get through this intro. One is storytelling, and the other is removing risk with that story. You should have both of those front and center the whole time you're making that pitch. And when you're telling your story, it's what I referenced before. It's not marketing. You're not convincing someone to buy what you're selling. You're not convincing someone to be a customer for your solution. You're convincing someone that if you give me money now, I'm going to give you more of it later, and a lot more of it. That is a different story than what you will tell to anyone else with your company. And as you tell that story, what the investor is doing is constantly assessing how risky is this and what is my risk tolerance? Because you're not giving a pitch just for someone to consider alongside your competitors. You're giving a pitch alongside every single other pitch that that investor could put their money behind. So it's a lot of factors, but a really big one is risk. How risky is it that I will get or won't get my money multiplied when there is an exit event? Constantly assessing that with your story. And that's why it is so important, even though it's kind of a negative view, to look at your pitch and your business building as risk. it is what the investor is thinking. And you do want to remove that as you're telling that story. So when we think about the story, there are a lot of pitch frameworks out there. There is no one right way to pitch. There is no one universally accepted framework. We have our own framework that we developed of core 10 sections that should be in your introductory pitch, kind of that core pitch. It's based on a ton of secondary research, hundreds of investor interviews. You might not want them in this order. It does tell a good narrative story to have them in this order, but these are really critical elements of information that you need to communicate. You need to tell the story of your opportunity through these different sections. And it can really help when you're building that pitch to think about them in sections that logically flow, because that's how you would expect a story to be told. So one of the common mistakes that we see founders make is skipping around, having some of your problem, a little bit of solution, then you go into your market size, then you go back to your solution, and then you tell a little bit more of your problem. That's where the story part of it can get really mixed up, because you're not walking me through from beginning, middle, and end. You're skipping around and you lose the investor. It does have to have that thread. So we're going to go through each of these and talk about what you need to tell for the story and what risk that's removing. So we're going to go through the 10. There are more sections of information that you would want to include in a full pitch. But if you're just doing your introduction, this is like a first, you got 5 minutes, give me all the core bits. These are the 10 that you want to focus on. And so just as a quick preview, if we start with our mission, the story that you're telling here is, why did you begin your company at all? What is your vision? What is your mission? I gave you some of my origin story when I introduced myself and why I started Scroobious. It makes an enormous difference in your pitch. Then you're going to go into the bigger problem, and you're going to tell the story of pain points, of concrete, tangible pain points that a large audience is feeling before you even get into how you solve it. You have to convince an investor, hey, this is a real problem for a big group of people. They have to buy into that on its own before they even think about how you're going to solve that problem. But then that's what you tell them next. And we've built a solution to this problem. This is how we're doing it. So you can see how we're working through a narrative and we're leading somebody through a story of an opportunity. I'm not going to walk through all of them right now because we're going to go through them a little more in depth. But the flip side of it, I just want to show you these two charts where you can see, if you're looking at your mission, the story of your origin story. Why are you doing this? What's the vision? Well, the risk that you're mitigating is that you're not going to quit, that when things get really hard, you're not going to walk away because you have a good reason to be doing what you're doing. And you're tied to it for more than just the potential of financial gain, right? So you're telling the story, but you know this is the risk that the investor is mitigating with that story. If you don't have a strong reason for doing what you're doing, it's pretty likely you're just going to check out when it gets really hard. And that's a risk for the investor, right? Similarly, if we look at the problem, the story is, hey, this is a big problem for a lot of people. There's acute pain that I've quantified. Great. You're mitigating the risk that there isn't actually a problem, or there isn't a big group of people experiencing problem, or it's not an acute problem. So you can see the two sides of the coin. You're telling a story, but the content of that story should always be removing risk from your opportunity. Do those two ways of looking at it make sense? Nice. Thank you for the head nods. I live for head nods and thumbs up. All right. Todd, head nod and thumbs up simultaneously. So talented. All right. So, ooh, look at it. Mafe, is that right? Little emoji thumbs up. Love it. Okay, so we're going to go through these 10. I've taken out a lot of my normal pitch workshop content. For anybody who does sign up for an account, there's hours of content in our platform that you can look at. There's tons of it in there. So I'm not going to go through everything here again, because it's pretty amazing that you can all join our community if you want to and get access to all of it. So for each of those 10 sections, we're going to look at a slide like this, and we're going to talk through it. And if you want to talk about anything else, please interrupt. Let's have a chat. Let's have a conversation. This is what the rest of this time is going to be, talking through this slide for each of these 10 sections. Okay, so when we talk about your mission, why are you doing this? We went over it a little bit, but for the investor, the story that you're telling here is you can trust me with your capital. I am doing this for a good reason, and I have the right experience to be starting a company like this. A lot of people don't like to start with their origin story, or they don't like to make it personal, but you are just as important as the business that you're building at the early stage. It changes as you get later. If you really build up your venture and you start raising series B, C, D, those are different factors in your pitch. But in the beginning, when you're very risky, you, founder and CEO, are the steward of the capital you're asking for. You are making the decisions. If you're CEO, you are the chief executive officer. You have all the control over how that money is spent and making sure that it is achieving the milestones you're communicating. So of course, the investor has to know that you're doing this for a good reason and that you're capable, and they have to believe in you. And you can't convince them of that. You can't remove that risk if you don't tell them some personal stuff about why you're doing this and explain why you are passionate or why you do have the expertise. You have to communicate that information. So the risks that you are removing with that information are, as we said, that you're going to quit. That when it gets super hard, you're going to just stop really making good decisions. You're going to check out. You're going to maybe leave the company because it doesn't mean enough to you, and you'd rather not doing. That's a big risk. Another risk is that you aren't really personally invested in solving this problem. That maybe you just wanted to start a company and you found a problem that you thought you could maybe solve, but really you just want to start a company, and this area isn't something that you're sinking your teeth into that you feel passionately about. That's a risk. So in the story and the material you say, you're just going to talk through the bullets of what led you to start this company, not your whole life story, but what are the things that led to this? How has your career, how has your life led you to start this company, and why is it meaningful for you so that you're really tied to it? So you're going to talk about that, how your mission is tied to you as founder, that you are dedicated to this, and that it's clear. There's a clear reason why. And really think about it. There's a lot of founders we've worked with where they try to manufacture something emotional or something they think that an investor would want to hear that would mitigate these risks. But if it's not true, an investor is going to be able to see through it. It's not doing you any favors to just make something that you think will resonate or be emotional if that's not actually why you started the company. And it's usually less powerful. So really think through, in the context of your startup, why? Tell me the why behind it. Any questions on how you talk about your mission or your origin story as a founder? Kelly, do you have a question?
I do. Allison, when I first started my company, I worked for the Department of Motor Vehicles. There's nothing less impact or mission driven than that. I mean, it was an opportunity to make money. When you're talking about your mission in those not mission driven, startups, but opportunistic startups, and it really is about making money. It's not about changing the world. How do you define your vision in a way and your mission in a way that actually is compelling to an investor?
Well, I'm going to guess that you went to investors who were more relevant to that type of opportunistic opportunity. That's a terrible way to phrase it. Opportunistic opportunity. It is nighttime for me here. It's been quite a day. But you're going to pick your investor, right? Who you pitch is equally important to how you pitch. And so I think a lot of the folks here are probably in a more similar boat to maybe where I am, or where I know a lot, the people that we're already working with are, where it's not so much that opportunistic angle where, hey, I'm just going to make you a lot of money, and their equity investors would take a different view. But if that is the case, I mean, Kelly, who you went to for money. It could also be a debt situation. Maybe that's more, eligible for loans or venture debt, if you've got some capital expenses and you can prove in your financial projections, if I have this money, I'm doing this, and then it's going to immediately have this big return. I've de-risked it with the numbers. That's a different sell. That's a different story. That can be very compelling to a certain type of investor, probably less compelling to a true angel investor, more compelling to a venture investor, would be my guess.
Thank you.
Okay. Everyone ready to move on to the problem?
Oh, I had my hand up. I don't know
Oh,
if it's
sorry, Ashley.
Oh, yeah, that was my fault. I clicked the wrong button and I saw some hands go away. So yeah, if you
You
raise your
hear
hand,
me.
please. Yeah, sorry, Ashley.
Allison, I'm really enjoying it so far. My question is, if you are pitching for something that's very personal to you and is around sensitive topics, how do you decide how detailed to go and how to not make it too heavy for the short amount of time that you have?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we do a lot of work with our founders. And in particular, this can be a tricky tightrope for women who tend to go a little more on the personal side or feel a little more deeply when we're talking about it. And it is a balance. How do you not talk about it in a way where you're going to start getting emotional? And that's where it's really thinking through isolating the steps that led you to start the company, right? Again, it's not your whole backstory. It's not the whole life story. And it's picking the steps, like what, I shared with you a bigger version than when I do my pitch of my entrepreneurial journey. But you bring about the facts and the pivotal moments and your experience that led you to say, I should start a company. Because starting a company is a really big decision. And then asking for funding for that company is a really big decision. So pick the highlights and pick the things that will help me logically get from here to there so that I say, yeah, that makes sense why she's doing this. That's a pretty clear story. And keep it at that level. Try not to delve in. It's also where practicing over and over again, having a narrative script, having a way that you are comfortable talking about it so that you don't sidetrack yourself and you don't go down rabbit holes where you start, getting in a more emotional place. Keep it at the statements. You're educating someone. You're helping them understand why you are where you are. You're not trying to get them to, understand your whole being. Does that help?
Absolutely, it does. Thank you.
Great. Zamora, do you have your hand raised? I can't quite tell on my screen.
I did have it raised, but I wrote my comments in the chat. I was just
Oh, sorry.
I had a similar question as it related to the personal story, because for me, which is what I stated in the chat, that it was very hard for me to kind of express, why I was doing what I was doing without getting overly emotional.
Yeah, it can be taught. Practice is the best thing to do, right? And just really getting yourself to that place of confidence. You're communicating, I'm doing this for the right reason. I'm fully qualified. You can understand why this is, and speaking about it in that way, right? It would be pretty easy for me to start going, oh, let me just side story. Let me tell you about this one pitch I was in with this famous VC, and we got in a fight because he just couldn't see past my gender, right? Like I could get into it from that side. That's not really de-risking me as a founder when you think about it. And maybe you do that over drinks one time if you're close to someone, but when you're in that situation of getting to know an investor, your point isn't to make them feel bad for you, and your point isn't for you to make yourself get too emotional. So pick the talking points that don't get you there. Pick the talking points that make you feel in control and confident about how you tell that story. Right, you get to pick. You get to pick what you talk about.
Kelly Cook just put a question in the chat. Kelly, do you want to ask it? I don't know if
Oh, hi. How is everybody? Hi,
Yeah,
Allison.
great
Thank you.
question.
Hey, Kelly.
Hi, thank you so much. Sorry, I will getting a few things done here. I'm so glad to be able to hop in. So for me, a lot of times as I'm stumbling now, I can get trapped on my words because my mind goes 100 miles an hour and trying to get my words to keep up. So for me, I almost need to memorize a narrative. So, and maybe it's reaching out to somebody objective, but I'm trying to figure out how I define and refine my narrative. So it's short, sweet, exactly what I'm trying to convey and comprehensive, but then not too elaborate where people get lost, and trying to figure out exactly what pieces, like if there's a framework to be like, include A, B, and C in your narrative and make it this short.
Yeah. So, I mean, like for sure, sign up for an account and go through. This is part of what we guide people on. But if you look, so a really good tip, if you're in that place where you're like, I have so much information, I don't know how to get it right, like into a workable place, even as a first draft, with the core 10, you're going to have a couple of slides for the beginning sections, one slide for some of the later ones, and we give you this guidance in the platform. But the key thing to do in a case like yours, this is what I would recommend, is for every slide, you should have one statement at the top, a header statement that is, what is the point of this slide? Why do I care? What is the major point that I want someone to remember? And you can draft out just those header statements as a start, because they should kind of lead each other through, right? You should be able to read just those statements at the top of the slides and get the point of your presentation, even if you don't read the rest of it. So it's like a skeleton. Think about it the same way. If you were going to write a story and you just wrote the first sentence of every paragraph as the keys for yourself, the cues of how do I walk through this story at the highest level? Start there and see if in 15 header statements, you can convey your point. It should help bring a little clarity. This isn't your final draft. This isn't, if you write a statement, it must be this statement all the time, but it can be a really helpful exercise to get yourself thinking in terms of that presentation style. And if I only have 3 slides to describe my problem, what would be the 3 big statements I want someone to know?
Yeah, and that makes complete sense. And I'm wondering if verbally communicating it then, but I can take this approach if I, and outline it like that, and then almost look at my headers and then reduce it backwards to then like make it into just a couple sentences. Like, is that something that, like, to then just say, if I'm meeting with somebody and they're like, what is your startup about? I'm like, what do I do? So is that a good approach to do, or anything else you would recommend from that, like 30-second explanation?
Yeah, I think you have to start with the longer, messier version and whittle it down into your tighter story. It's much more difficult to go the opposite way. Start with the messy and you'll get clarity. And for me, it's not, some people it's natural to think kind of in slide format because we're so used to that, right? PowerPoint really changed how we communicate a lot of things. Think about it that way if it's helpful to you. If you were picturing your slide and you could only write one sentence at the top, here's the point of this. This is why I'm showing it to you. And then anything else you put on that slide has to convince me that point is true. You can't put anything else on there. If it's not convincing me of that point, you don't get to say it.
Yeah, of course. Then it's just information overload, of course.
Yeah, but start with that and see if you can get to a storyline that is comfortable where you're making your point and you're limiting yourself, right? Every slide, you've got those blinders on of I can only support the point at the top. So is it the right point at the top? Do I, can I give the information I need to? Should I think about it if I only have 3 sentences? It's, again, there's different ways to go about this type of exercise. That has tended for our founders to be a really helpful one to get yourself on that track of what is the investment story here? Because it can't be all the things.
No, yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And the irony is that's exactly what I do with data is take the super messy and make it simple. So totally just in my blind spot, apply the same methodology. So I was looking at it the wrong way. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
appreciate
you're
it.
welcome. And then you'll get down to, like, I don't
Yep.
have in here, but we've got on the platform, a bunch about how you even come up with the tagline on your title slide, which is your
Mhm.
short version. When you say, someone asks me what you do, eventually you get to a statement of what do you do for who?
Mhm.
That you need one sentence that says, what do you do for who? It's harder than it sounds like, because it's
No,
not.
that's right. Yeah, that's that you have to go through all the messy stuff to be able to get to this simple. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yep.
And you have to practice it and you have to get feedback. It's an iterative process, and it's a live story. It's a live document until you are done with that fundraise that you're using it for. You're constantly going to iterate on it and test it out. You're going to be, right, like you're a data person, you're going to be A/B testing this forever with lots of different people until you get to a place where you see eyes light up and people get it.
And it just clicks.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm going to move on, but I mean,
Thank
again,
you.
I'm not like pushing sales because you all can just join, but this is exactly.
No,
exactly
it's awesome. I appreciate it so
Yeah.
much. Thank you for answering my question. Hopefully it was helpful as well.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Kelly. Victor, you have your hand up.
Yes, I just want to go briefly, Allison, and thanks for joining us tonight. To Zamora and Ashley's point about the emotional thing, it struck me while you were talking and while they were talking that you have a personal experience and you need to express that to frame, the why of why you're even in that environment pitching. But it struck me that you have an experience and you may even have built a solution for yourself to address the need, right, that you found for yourself. But you're actually building a company to share that solution with others who have the same circumstance or the same need. And I'm wondering if that's a way to not only kind of gear shift your emotions, but also resonate well with the pitch audience.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, Victor. I'm actually gonna let's see. So I usually guide people, never delete a slide, just put it in your appendix, and then if it is relevant to the conversation, you pull it up and you look awesome. So I took that. I always do that same thing. And there are some common kind of tropes that you can bring up when you talk about your origin story. And a very common one is, I experienced a problem. There was no good solution. I'm making a good solution. And it's a pretty natural transition when you talk about what you experienced, that when you get into your problem section, you say, and when I researched it, it's an enormous problem, right? It's not just me, it's all these people that are experiencing this problem. So that is a very natural way to talk about why you started doing it to begin with, and then you realize the enormity of the situation and it warranted making a company.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the point. Okay, let's move on and talk about how you can de-risk your problem. So when we talk about our problem section, which is coming after your introduction, your mission, why are you doing this? Here, like I mentioned at the beginning, before we even learn about your solution, the investor has to be convinced that this is a real problem, because there are risks, right? The risks you're removing with your story of the problem is that there's no true problem to actually solve. You're like hunting for a problem, that the pain isn't acute. Sometimes there's a pain point, but it's dull and it's manageable, and that doesn't spur someone to spend money to solve it. So you also want to communicate that this is being felt very strongly and people are looking for something to solve it because it's an acute pain point. And there's also a risk that the way you describe the problem makes it seem like there isn't a really good way to solve it. So again, there's a lot, but I'm only going through these kind of top level slides, and there's a lot of tips and guidance for how to communicate these things. But with your problem section, one big pitfall is that you stop when it's too high of a problem still, right? Like if I stopped at my problem statement as there is a big funding gap, Well, I can't solve the funding gap. No one company can solve the funding gap. It's too big. So you have to put some thought into what is the problem that you actually are going to solve? Because what's next is your solution. And remember, if we think of those header statements as walking me through the story, they need to follow each other. So your problem can start big, but if you have 3 slides to talk about it for a 5-minute pitch, by that 3rd slide, I better understand the actual problem that you solve. It's usually a subset of what you start talking about. And with that continuation of problem, you need to quantify. That's a big way to remove risk. Put some numbers in there, cite your sources. I can't tell you how many decks that we see that just make statements and they don't have any data or citations backing it up. And then you're asking the investor to take your word for it, which they're not going to do. So you remove risk by validating with secondary sources how many of these people or businesses or whoever your customer base is are experiencing this pain point. What does that pain look like? It could be dollars, but it could be other ways that you measure it. It could be hours spent on something. It could be lost time. It could be whatever. There's a whole bunch of different ways to quantify what this pain point is. It doesn't always have to be dollars, but you need to do that work. You can't just throw statements up there. It's not de-risking it. And if anything, it's a little more risky because you're showing that you didn't go do the work to validate the problem. You just wrote statements there. So when you think about that content that you're putting in that will mitigate risk, it has to be understandable. You have to communicate this problem like the investor is 5 years old. Like you actually have to talk about it at that level. It has to be generalized. Anyone can understand it. It has to be valid. This is using data, citing sources, making it real. It has to show that something is acute so that it would spur someone to want to fix the problem and solve it somehow. And it has to, at the end of it, seem solvable. You have to end that problem section where somebody can start thinking, oh, this is a solvable problem. Make sense about how you talk about your problem? All right. We're gonna move on here. So now we're going to talk about how you solve that problem. And again, same format of the slide. Here, when you're thinking about the story that you're telling, your solution has to solve the problem you just told me about. Don't solve a different problem. That's not what I'm looking for in the story. And the risks that you're mitigating here. There's a risk that your solution can't be executed. So make sure you're describing that solution of yours in a way that seems doable, that seems reasonable, like you could actually do it. There's a risk that you don't fully address the problem you just told me about, right? If you get to define it. That's one of the things about your pitch. You decide what goes in there. You're telling the story. So tell it in a way where these risks are mitigated. Make sure that you are fully addressing the problem you told me about. And if you're not, redefine the problem. You can do that. And there's a risk that what you're building maybe isn't actually needed. There's always a risk that someone is infatuated with their own solution and they're pushing it out there because they want to build it, but it's not actually needed in the world based on the way that you're telling the story. So you want to make sure, again, it's clear. Make sure we understand what you're doing. Please don't end your solution section without ever showing me the thing. Show me the solution. It can be mock-ups, it can be a rendering, it can be something you drew on a napkin, it can be a prototype that you're holding. I don't care. You have to make it tangible. You have to have someone be able to picture it and visualize how your paying customer interacts with your solution. That's what makes it clear. That's what makes it seem workable. And that's what makes it seem complete, that you're addressing the problems you told me about. Ashley, what's going on?
Thanks, Allison. So what if you're solving a very big problem and you have multiple layers of how you're going to ultimately serve your market and serve your customer? In one pitch deck, do you start with just focusing in on your MVP, or do you show the stairs that lead to true success of the overall problem solving?
So, I mean, some of this is dependent on, your situation, which I can talk in generalities, but typically in a case like that, where you have an expanding product pathway or you are building a bigger solution, you would talk about your proof of concept or your go-to-market or, where you're starting. Right? So you're validating through your initial entry into the market, and you're going to have reasons why this is where you're starting. This is your immediate market. Right? For me, I'm building a marketplace. I started with founders for a number of reasons, and we've validated that we're, in the market, all those things. Now we're focusing on the other side of the marketplace. We couldn't do all of it at one time. And maybe you have a segment that are your early adopters, and they're going to help prove your concept, right? So a lot of times people will talk about it in that way, and then go through, what is next? What's your pipeline look like, or your product pathway as you expand that offering?
Great, very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Swapnil, do you have a question?
Yes. So, you're talking about, is there a real pain point? Is there a real problem? And is there a real solution? Let's say both of those things are true. But in an ecosystem, let's say there are two-sided, there are customers who need a certain solution, and then there are current solution providers. Imagine like a regulatory framework, but people don't want somebody to solve that complexity. How do you, if you're in that kind of an environment, the problem could be real, the solution could be real, but I think there is a question of, is it desirable? And the answer depends on who are you asking. So
I guess I'm a little confused. If there is a real problem that exists and you are solving that problem, but there's no market willing to purchase it, then it's not an investable opportunity. Imagine
this is like a closed network where people benefit from not having, where the people benefit, like an oligopoly, where people benefit from that closed network where you're able to keep a higher price point, things are more complicated, so we were able to charge the customers more. If you were to make things simpler, it's going to be disruptive to the existing players. So the question of desirability, it depends on who are you asking, right? The existing players, they don't want somebody to come up with a solution. The customers who can benefit from, of course they want it. So how do you kind of present that kind of like imagine an Uber? Did the taxi companies want the Uber to win? Probably not. So
right, but you wouldn't be pitching a legacy competitor for investment in your company, right? Like Uber didn't pitch taxi companies for investment in Uber. They pitched investors who understood the opportunity and the innovation in the space and believed that they would profit from it.
Yes. So the problem I'm dealing with right now is, in order for you to kind of develop some insights on what problems to be solved, I had to become part of the network. And then how do you then disrupt from inside? Right? You're essentially going to become part of that network. And then you're saying, how I want to disrupt this space by developing a solution. So I'm trying to figure out like what would be the best way to kind of frame this. You want to come up with a solution that's going to benefit the larger masses, but at the same time, you don't want to, how do I say, not make enemies with the people you're going to work with.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm happy. It sounds like a deeper conversation that's pretty particular to your situation, and I'm happy to talk about it more, but that's a strategic question, right? So based on what you're building, is this something that you should be fundraising from external equity investors, or maybe this is something that you approach as strategic and they incubate you and you build it within one of those companies who might be interested in utilizing what you're building to have a competitive advantage over the others? Or maybe this is really great for a corporate venture capital arm of one of those companies, if they have one, that might want to invest in something that could be strategically important to the growth of that company. There's all different kinds of capital and ways to get capital. And a lot of it is those strategic questions. Am I going to the right source to build my company? Because you don't have to go seek investment. It could be, like I said, you could be pitching to a strategic to incubate what you're doing from within.
Mhm. Yeah, thanks for the thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks, Fatma. Divya, you've got your hand up.
Hey, Allison, long time no speak.
I know.
All right, this is more from like the product, right? So my question is, so the detail of the product or the solution that you include in your deck, right? I understand it from like, you want to present it to kind of get that intrigue and that conversation going, but how much is reasonable? And also from that same lens, it would depend on where you are in your journey, right? Like if you're in like a seed state, you've kind of at least done market fit analysis, right? Like you've done your product market fit. So like, what is that balance, right? Like you said, like where do we kind of say, when is this good enough?
So really what you're trying to communicate and what you're mitigating the risk by helping somebody understand, what does this actually do for your paying? How does your paying customer actually use it? It's more informative. And so I just pulled up a couple of examples here, right? Like when I talk about showing your solution, it's not every single thing that it could do that you have not yet built. These are two examples of wireframes. These are pre-product, right? These are mock-ups, and it's talking someone through a little story, a little vignette. Pick one way somebody would interact with what you're building to solve their problem, and just walk me through some touch points. It really helps. It makes it real. It allows the investor to understand how a customer would use it, because again, they're not looking to be your customer most of the time. They're de-risking that someone would actually adopt the thing that you want to make, right? And if you can't explain it to me in a way where I can start picturing someone using it or interacting with it in my head, it's more risky, right? It's hard for me to see how somebody would solve their problem with what you're building. So that's the level of detail, is you want someone to get it. They don't need to understand all the things, because again, if someone's interested in investing, they're going to have more conversations with you, right? Your goal is always get more time with someone, have a longer conversation, have them want to diligence you. That's when they'll ask you more technical questions, or they'll get into the weeds more with you. Maybe they'll even bring in an expert in your space if it's something technical, not in the first conversation. Those are for later. So you just want someone to get it and be excited about it.
So to just kind of probably sum it up, it's kind of saying you thought through the product enough to kind of go in and ask them, saying, I know what my vision is to execute on my mission.
Yeah, or it's even one more, like take both of these companies. They showed these clickable mock-ups to potential paying customers and had a number of them, right? They were able to say, we worked with 50 potential customers and, they are really excited about this. One of them gave us a pre-order to help us finance building it because they want to have this solution so much. So there's ways that you can remove risk without necessarily having to spend a lot of money to go make the thing you're doing immediately. But you have to make it real. You can't just walk in and say, I have an idea and I think it's going to work, right? Then it's like super risky. So that's it. Whatever you can do, again, with the to make it real for someone and have them see that this is an actual thing and it's going to solve the problem for your paying customer. That's what you want them to get. Okay. We're at 9:08.
Yeah, how are we doing on time?
Yeah, I think we're good till 9:30, right? So we have like 20 more minutes. And we are, I have many of these left. So I think
Ashley, can we come back to you later or put the question in the, okay, thanks. Got thumbs up. Thanks.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to go a little bit faster here as we go through the rest of these sections, and maybe I'll go through a few and then we can kind of stop if there's questions. But next up in our story, now we understand why you're doing this. We believe there's a big problem. We get how you're going to solve it. How do you make money with it? Your business model is the next one, right? Now we're getting into mechanics of your business because, again, this is an investment opportunity. You are telling this story to a potential investor, not a customer. So they have to understand the financial side of it. It doesn't mean you have to be post-revenue and everything's figured out, but you have to have solid thinking here, and you have to have done things that will remove risk that it's going to work, that you can do the things that you're talking about. So with your business model, most important thing, make sure you know who is your paying customer. It might not be your end user. Who is paying you for what you're doing? What is the model by which they're paying you, right? There's lots of different business models that you could utilize. Maybe it's even you're getting advertising revenue. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to be as straightforward as it's SaaS or it's a one-time fee or whatever it is. Really understand who's paying you and what is the model for that revenue. Those have to be in your story, even if it's pre-everything. You have to show solid thinking there because you're mitigating the risk that monetization isn't going to be feasible for this. Maybe you do have a great solution to a big problem, but no one's going to pay you for it, or the way that you think they're going to pay you just doesn't pass the gut check. So that's a risk, right? Another risk is that you won't be able to generate substantial revenue. You know, is there some math to do here? Could you scale this model in a way where it's going to be very profitable for your business? Or are you pricing things such that you couldn't generate a substantial amount of revenue? And then another risk is that your target customer is still ambiguous, that it's not clear who's paying you for this service. There might be a lot of people that would want to use it, and I can picture all these people using it, but who's the paying customer? That has to be very clear. So that's how you mitigate risk with your business model. Again, doesn't have to be fully baked. You don't have to already be generating revenue, but it has to be clear thinking and it has to be based on something, right? So like I can share with you, even for me, we haven't yet launched our major revenue generating side of our marketplace, but I've done a lot of research into what people are paying for angel groups, what they're paying for different subscriptions that are parallel to what we're doing. So I've triangulated at a price point and checked it through potential customer discovery calls. So I feel pretty good about it, right? That's removing risk, even though I haven't charged someone for it yet. There's a number of ways, again, that you can mitigate that risk as you're telling the story of this investment opportunity. Okay. I'm going to keep cooking through a little bit. Once we understand your business model, how you're generating revenue, then you talk about your market size. Well, how much revenue could you make? Market size is really important to some people. Some people could not care less about it. Some of this is a little bit knowing your investor when you're early stage. There are different schools of thoughts on the importance of market size, but everyone agrees that you should do a bottom-up market size. And if you don't know what that means, it's our longest lesson in our platform. It is the most watched. We have an Excel workbook you can download that talks you through it. I have a whole other workshop only on doing a bottom-up market size. You can do it, I promise. It is fairly logical to think through if you have the right framework. But it's important to talk about this because there are some big risks depending on the type of investor you're talking to. The biggest risk is that the size of your market doesn't justify or doesn't support investment. This is more relevant to venture investors than angel investors or family offices or some other types of capital. For a venture investor, I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here just because it is important to understand, and then we'll move on. But the biggest difference if you're talking to a fund, to venture capital, is that they are managing other people's money. They have limited partners who supply the capital for that fund, that the general partner who you talk to is deciding how to allocate. They're making the investments on behalf of somebody else. They know that in their portfolio, all the things they invest in, only 1 or 2 are going to return the profit that they're looking for. Everything else is gonna not return for them. That's the dynamics, the statistics of how this works. That means that they can't invest in something that doesn't have the potential to return the whole fund. They don't expect everything to do that, but it has to have the potential. And that means it's somewhere between like 10 to 100x, right? Like big numbers, big return, depending on the size of the fund. And you have to have a market that's big enough to support that, right? It has to be in the billions. This has to be able to be enormous opportunity for the fund. It just doesn't, it's uninvestable for them if it's not that big. So that's the risk in the market size. Angel investors might not care so much. They don't need those giant returns most of the time. They are not managing other people's money. They're not reporting back to them. They decide what's successful to them as an outcome. So it's a little bit different based on who you're pitching to, right? Or if you're making a pitch for non-dilutive capital, then this is less important. It's more about the viability in the market. But that's where thinking through really the numbers of what is my bottom-up market size, how much revenue could I generate based on how many potential customers exist for me and what I would charge them, my business model. I'm going to stop there. Market size is a huge thorn for almost every founder. It's super challenging and stressful. You are not alone if that's how you feel. You can totally make one, and I will gladly help anybody here do it. Okay, competition. And I apologize for cooking through. I know I said I don't like to hear myself talk, but I want to make sure we get through all this and then we have some time for some more questions. So here, competition, when you think about describing that landscape, you're telling the story that there is competition, but you know where you play and you are capturing white space and solving the customer's problem in a way that others aren't. There is a real risk that your problem has no solutions. So if you say you have no competitors, that is a big risk. That means maybe this isn't worth solving if no one else is trying to solve it. Showing your competitors actually validates that there is a problem and there is a need for a solution. So please, none of you say you have no competitors. It's a big red flag. It's a big risk. And think about your competitive set. It could be other companies that you're up against, or you could be up against a behavior change. It could be a status quo way of doing things. Susan is clapping like behavior change. Yeah. All right. So those are risks. And then the other risk is that you aren't substantially differentiated from what's already out there. So you wouldn't capture a big part of the market because there's too many things that are too similar to you. So I hope this is making sense kind of from that, you know, in the spirit of how do you de-risk things or remove risk with your pitch. You're telling a story. This is a positive looking, big opportunity, bold statement story. But the content you're choosing to tell in that story is always removing risk that it's going to work, right? So I don't want you to think this is negative in tone. You're focused on risk. You're not. You're telling the story in a way where the investor thinks that risk has been mitigated, that you're lowering that risk with what you've done and how you're telling the story. Okay. Why now? This is another big area. It's not in every pitch framework. It is really important to communicate. And it has two factors to why now. There's a macro sense and there's a micro sense. So in the macro sense, you're telling the story of why now is the time for your company to exist. Why is the world ready for this? What is happening in a macro sense that is accelerating the need for what you're building? What are the trends? What are things that you're picking up on? Why is now when people are going to adopt what you're building? There's a lot of companies out there that didn't mitigate the risk that the world wasn't ready for this. And it was a good idea and a good solution that solved a problem, but no one was ready to buy it. No one was ready to adopt it for some other macro reasons. So you can mitigate that risk by talking about why is now the time. And then there's another risk that you're addressing and why now, which is that now isn't the right time for you to be fundraising. That's the micro. So you mitigate that risk by showing the traction that you've achieved thus far, and you are at a place where raising money will fuel growth, right? That you have achieved milestones and you are at a place where this needs fuel to grow. It's not at the very, very beginning stages. So that's two sides to why now. And those are some pretty big risks that the investor is evaluating to determine how much do I believe that this is ready for the market, and do I believe that this founder understands that it's the right time to be fundraising. All righty, we've got 10 more minutes. I'm going to keep going. Go to market strategy. This is all about customer acquisition. You can see now that once we pass the beginning sections, we're really into mechanics, we're into execution, and we're removing risk of this is the investment story, right? This isn't the customer, this isn't marketing, this is removing risk of investment potential. So with go-to-market, here you're communicating that you understand your customer. You have what's called founder market fit, and that you know where they are, you know how to reach them so that when it is time to go sell, you're ready. You know how to get their attention, you know how to convert them. And that's the risk that you're removing. So again, I can share with you, right? I'm building a marketplace on the other side of my market, our angel investors. Clearly, I understand founders. I didn't understand angel investors, so I became one. And I got myself into some pretty great angel investing networks so that I've mitigated risk that when we're going to go push to angels, now I have access to thousands of them and I know how to reach them. Right? That's a mitigator of risk, even though I haven't yet entered that market. So those are things for you to think about. Who is your paying customer, and do you understand them? Are you in their networks? Do you know how to get in front of them and convert them? That's the risk that you're mitigating and communicating with that story, that you can acquire customers. All right, we're almost at the end here. Your team. So we just talked about founder market fit. Here, you're communicating the story that you have people working with you who can execute all the stuff you just told me about. So you don't have to have co-founders necessarily, but every investor knows that, and you should know that one person can't do all things, right? No matter how good you are, you can't do all the things required to make this company successful and launch it. So who have you brought onto the team? Who have you recruited that's going to help you fill your skill gaps or fill your capacity gaps so that you mitigate risk, that you can actually do the things that you say you're going to do, that you have the skills and the capacity with other members that are working with you. It could be working full-time, it could be part-time, it could be contractors, it could be advisors who are hands-on that are working for some equity, but communicate that story that you've identified the gaps that you have as founder CEO, and that you have people with you who are doing those things. And there you're mitigating that risk, right? You're showing you a founder market fit, and you're showing you can actually execute on all the stuff you just told me about. Finally, this is not in my core 10 model. I put this in just for tonight. You have to mitigate the risk of you. You can have the best pitch. You can mitigate all the other risk, but the investor has to feel a connection with you. This is a little bit more intangible. They have to want to work with you. So there is a whole other side of this that is how you present your pitch that we didn't get into tonight, but that is equally important. You have to let your personality come through as part of the story. You need to figure out your signals of confidence and how are you comfortable telling this story so that you have command over it. What do you want to show about how you're presenting so that someone resonates with you as a person? Right here, there's a lot of risk. You carry a lot of risk. There's a risk that you aren't a strong leader. Maybe you don't feel comfortable presenting and you kind of look down a lot and you use a lot of like filler words and I don't know, right? That's a risk. How are you going to lead a company if that's the kind of presentation that you're giving? there's a risk that maybe you're not as competent as you think you are. And when you're pushed with questions, you don't actually understand the science or whatever it is, the technology behind what you're building. You have to be competent in that and talk about it confidently. There's a risk that you're not coachable at the early stage, that you don't think you need anybody's advice or guidance or help. That's not true. And investors really love coachability and coachable founders. There's another risk that maybe you just don't get along. Maybe you just mix vibes. It's oil and water and you don't feel a connection with someone. Those are all big risks, and you mitigate it not with the content on your slide, but with how you present yourself and how you present that pitch. So I'm going to stop here. Thank you all for listening to me. We have 6 minutes left until it's 9:30, but I'm happy to stick around longer if people want to talk about more things or have questions.
Awesome. Allison, really quickly, thank you very much for this. Mafe, if anybody has any questions, please raise your hands.
Hi, Allison. I have a question on the market.
Sure.
When do we engage and pay for market research of the industry where we are participating in? Or do we have to pay for that?
You don't have to pay for any market research if you don't need it. There is so much information available to us now that you can get a hold of without paying anybody for anything. And I'm going to pull up here. Are you mainly talking about kind of finding that sizing data? Like, how do I find information about my industry?
Yes, and when do we engage that? Because I've been seeing, like, for example, in the industry that I would like to participate, it had increased tremendously, about 100 billion from just within the 2 years span of time in terms, and it's interesting. When do we use that? Of course, I could reference it probably in the pitch deck. However, when it comes to investors, is that something that it has to be paid by us? And you had said that it's not necessary. So.
No, you don't have to pay. Remember, with the investors, you're building that compelling story and you're convincing them that this is real and you have a good solution to it and a good execution plan. So it's not a requirement that you pay for research to be able to convince someone of that information and of the opportunity that you're presenting. You have to have data, you have to have done research, but paying for it is separate. So I'd really think about those statements. What is the skeleton of your story? What do you want to convince people of? Then think, what are the data points that would convince someone of that story I want to tell? And can I find those data points in secondary research? Maybe you have to conduct some primary research and you need to do it at a scale or with a methodology that you do want to hire a market research firm to run a primary study for you. That's one thing. I did do that at my last company, at the medical device company. I wanted to run a conjoint study with clinicians who would be potential customers. You can do that, but you don't have to. It really depends on your business and the data points you're trying to get. One thing I will point out, a great source of data is looking at industry incumbents. People totally underutilize this source. If you go to a big legacy company or a trade association in your industry, scroll down to the bottom if it's a big company and click on investors, they have so much market research in there. You can look at every investor call, every annual report. I did this for every pharmaceutical company in our indication area at my last company. Crazy good data in there. It doesn't have to just be government sources, right? A credible source can mean a lot of things. So really get a little more creative with how you're looking for the data points you need to make that compelling case.
Thank you.
Yeah. Dean.
Kelly Kimball, and then Dean, and then I've got an announcement.
The concept of the team is always something that comes up in a lot of folks that I talk to, Allison. So many people think they got to have co-founders with them. And one of actually someone who's on this call right now, Shannon, who works with me, has reminded me that like she has zero interest in being a co-founder or founder. She has zero interest in being an entrepreneur. She doesn't want to bet it all on red, she says. But she's really, really good at supporting the entrepreneur and supporting the co-founder. And so I guess, and this was an eye opener to me, we really might want to think about the team in terms of not co-founders, but how do you find those really unique individuals who are great entrepreneurial support teams?
Yeah.
And where do you find those people? And the only second thing I want to say is a statement to thank you for your activism. I would love for you to come here sometime strictly to talk about that. And how is it that, over half the people on this call, cannot be frustrated by going out and talking to VC after VC who just isn't going to pay attention to them because of the way they look? And how do you get over that? And how do you get over that hump? And where do you go if you're a founder of color or if you're a female founder? I would love to hear your thoughts on that when you have another hour, to spend with us. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Kelly. And obviously you're a huge activist as well. And we do some other work in those areas. But yeah, I mean, I didn't talk about, I'm part of some national nonprofit organizations. I'm on different task forces within different agencies because I do really care about this. And I do believe that there are other ways that we can allocate capital to innovators who have been blocked from accessing venture capital systems. Venture capital does not have to be the answer. There are other ways to do it, and it's up to us to innovate in that space and push for it. And that's what I'm doing along with a whole bunch of other people. But yeah, I'd love to talk about that at some point. And part of what I do too, if you find me on socials, on LinkedIn or Twitter, I'm very active. I do a lot of posting. I try to bring a lot of this data to light. It's amazing how many people, and in particular investors or first-time founders, don't know the statistics of who gets what. I did not know at my last company. I went in totally eyes closed to this fundraising process. I think part of how we raised the 10 was I didn't know, and I am a little bullheaded by nature and was willing to just get a little more aggressive in conversations when I was getting pushback, and at the time did not identify that I was getting prevention-oriented questions because I'm a woman and not a man. And as soon as I looked at the statistics, I thought, oh my God, of course I couldn't raise what we needed to for our Series B. Of course, it wasn't me. It was that women don't get venture capital money. That's not a me problem. That's a system problem. So I appreciate you bringing that up, Kelly, because it clearly is an area that I'm passionate about.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people in this room who just don't understand why they're being told no. And you get friends and family interested, you get some seed folks interested, but then you get to that institutional investor, and it's just confusing. Because what is it am I doing wrong? And I spoke to a gentleman, I think I told you about it. Yeah, well, I've introduced you to him, Derek Ali, who's the Grammy Award winner. I mean, this guy is unbelievably successful. And he goes to VCs and he's tattooed up to his neck, a black gentleman who is never going to get the attention of 99% of the VCs out there, not because of who he is and not because of his accomplishments, which are extraordinary, it's just because of the way he looks. And how do we get around that? And what strategies are there? And what I think that's really important to a lot of people in this room, a lot of people in the startup community generally. But I hear that from people in this room a lot, that it's just, what am I doing wrong? And it's not what you're saying. It's oftentimes who you're talking to and how do we get to the right people? Anyway, sorry.
Yeah,
that's
well, and it's a little bit of both, right? It's baked in bias, it's generational bias, where if you have not been in networks that are familiar with how investors talk and speak and what they're looking for and their signals that they identify as potential good investments or as de-riskers, you don't know how to present in a way that they're going to find investable. And not to say that that will solve all of the problems, it clearly won't. I mean, again, with less than 1% of capital going to certain groups that make up more than half of the US population, that's not the full answer. But it does make a really big difference. And, take Derek, who I've now done some work with, he was presenting in a way that totally made sense to angel investors and friends and early adopters, and it makes sense why he's able to raise from that group. It wasn't speaking in the way like we've been talking tonight to what the venture investors are looking for in terms of the content and how he was presenting it. And it would give him a better chance to know that. And it's a great example because he's extremely successful in one career. And even for him, this is not an intuitive space to be in.
I'm going to be very, very quick. I'll make a statement because I'd love your feedback, but we're out of time. I'm really pleased, Allison, that you had that you in there, because a really good example, I'm looking at an investment right now out of New Zealand. And the problem is such a good opportunity. It's not funny. I mean, there's so many things there that have been de-risked and so on, except for the person who's the founder, who's so specialist in knowledge, so specialist in what she does, that it's scary if she got hit literally by a bus. It would ruin potentially that getting to that next stage. And it's big business. So adding to your statement of the you de-risking, I think you need to add, how do you de-risk the person whom is really specialist? And this is quite specialist. And how do you get over that one? So it's just a point of thinking about that. If you have a really unique idea and you are really it, how do you de-risk that? Because right now, that's my big question mark. Otherwise, I'd be in like Flynn. So just a statement.
Yeah, it's a really great point. And it's not something I had on here, but it is a really good point. And I guess to go along with it, you know, the questions that I would have, if that's a major concern, is she coachable in a sense where she would be open to creating some redundancy in very specialized knowledge? Because as niche or technical or amazing as someone is, there are others who can fill in, even if they're in fractional roles, and make the one, you know, the bus rule go away.
Yeah, well, the good news is that, like we've said, Craig and I've said, hey, that's what you've got to get rid of, that de-risk that part, and then and she is, which is wonderful. So that's why I want to point that out, because it was like everything in the model is wonderful except for that one.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And there are a number of opportunities that to me is a solvable issue with the risk of the you. There are a number of opportunities I know of where $1 million deals have gone away because of a personality clash, because the founder didn't seem coachable, or struck someone the wrong way, or, you know, just changed their personality after the initial pitches when it got into due diligence. A person can kill a deal. Hey, Craig.
Craig.
Hey, Allison. Just a quick follow-up. Look, I think the material that you've provided tonight is fantastic. It's a really good blueprint for people pitching and putting that content together. Question I've got, in your course material, do you provide coaching for people and actually giving the pitch? Because there's one thing writing the content, which is really important. It's actually tips of doing the pitch itself, because often what I've seen is it's great material, but the actual execution of the pitch was just not well done. So just interested in your thoughts there.
Yeah, absolutely. The way you deliver it, the presentation style, is just as important as the content itself. So in the platform, we do have material about how you present, and we give guidance on that. One of the points of personalized feedback is a Zoom session with a pitch coach to go through the entire deck and presentation. And then with the investor side of things, we're giving investors the opportunity to leave feedback, whether anonymously or transparently, to the founder. And in order to list on our platform, you have to have both a deck and you have to have a 1-minute video, so that there's a human element and they can see your delivery and they can leave feedback on whatever they want. And a lot of our practice sessions with active investors are in that supportive, hey, let me get this out, let me practice my pitch, you give me all the feedback on whether it's the presentation or the content. We're constantly trying to expose our founders to that raw feedback so that they hear it and they get it. And then as we as we build our own product, we have lots and lots of cool ideas about how to utilize generative AI and how to build models that identify promotion versus prevention questions, all in that spirit of preparing. How do you actually present this? And how do you signal confidence with you and your style?
Cool. Well done.
I'm looking at the time. Allison, we're over. I just want to thank you. This was really incredible. On behalf of everyone here, thank you. And we need you. And also thank you, Kelly Kimball, for the amazing sponsorship. And just to want to give a little reminder to everyone as we sign off, please join us next week as we do a workshop on de-risking the entrepreneur. So we're going to be doing a further deep dive on this very important topic. And thank you all for joining us this evening. On behalf of Susan and Liz, thank you. Please stick around for some overtime, and I'm going to stop the recording.